Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Tom Gurr with Pacific Technology Alliance. We are on today with U.S. Representative Greg Walden from Oregon's 2nd District. He is the ranking member on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. He comes from a very rural district, which is perfect. We're going to chat today a little bit about rural broadband and some of his efforts on rural broadband. So he is passionate about connectivity, understands this issue very well, and has really been a national leader on rural broadband. So it's a great honor to have him, and it's a great opportunity. So Congressman Walden, welcome, and we appreciate you giving us the time.
Well, Tom, it's good to be with you, and I appreciate your interest in this issue. It's a big one for the country, and I think we've all learned during the pandemic and being out boxed in at home or wherever, maybe our Wi-Fi connections aren't quite as good in the office or at home as you'd like, or maybe you don't have quite the connectivity or none at all. So it actually has opened the door for us to do a lot more in this space, which is good.
Yeah, and thank you again for chatting with us. So I guess off the top, let me ask you just quickly about sort of a ground, level setting issue here. Sort of, the FCC estimates there's 25 million Americans that don't have access to a high-speed connection. Largely, those are rural consumers. Microsoft has done some real granular research on this. They have that number north of 100 million folks that don't have access, closer to 150 million folks who don't have access to a high-speed connection. I'm sure you've seen those numbers. I'm wondering, from your perspective, why the discrepancy? What is it we're missing here? And given how critical it is, why the discrepancy?
Yeah, I don't know about the 160 number or the 25 million number. I've used 21. I've seen them all. What I will tell you is I don't think anybody knows for sure. And part of that is because we have never in this country gotten the mapping piece right. We rely on carrier data, the 477 forms, which everybody admits probably aren't accurate and need a different way to try and account for who has coverage and who doesn't. And so that's part of why we passed the Broadband Data Act. It's why going clear back to the original Obama stimulus program where they put billions into building out broadband, I argued, could we where the underserved areas are before we overbuild those areas that are already served. And of course, the money went out the door and we never did the mapping the way we should. So I've really been dedicated to trying to get good data so we know where in the country we really need to put the taxpayers' money. Private sector is going to build out where there's concentrations and profits to be made. The limited public money needs to go to connect all of America and at speeds that make sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you make a good point there in the sort of COVID environment that we find ourselves today, that it's a public health crisis. Connectivity is now more important than it's ever been, whether we're talking about telecommuting or telemedicine or as an economic driver or public safety. I think there are a variety of really important pieces here that really highlight how critical this is right now. So I'm curious if you want to tell us. I saw that you had just released your broadband infrastructure package yesterday, and wondered if you wanted to tell us a little bit about some of those efforts and kind of what your goals are and where you see that headed.
Yeah, we've got about 26 different pieces of legislation, so I won't go into great detail on any one specific. But the long and the short of it is, we really want to get the right processes in place so that we can get serious about moving forward in a rapid basis to connect America. I mean, when you get right to it, I've always tried to put the consumer first. If you do what's right for the consumer, you'll get innovation, you'll get competition, you'll get lower prices. And I think we need to do that. I think we need to right size the environmental reviews for existing infrastructure. We've heard all kinds of horror stories about trying to just replace an antenna or modern one, not even necessarily any bigger or anything else. And there you run into some local government regulation that requires you to do all kinds of things, especially pay more in fees and all that. And I've had very serious discussions with some of the local government friends of mine. And, I know there's a balance and I know we've got to have a process. Doggone it, they come and beg for money from Congress to build out broadband, and then they have all these roadblocks that drive up costs and slow down deployment. We got to get serious in America. You want to deploy broadband, you want to do it at a speed that makes sense, and you want to get it out there sooner rather than later, then let's work in partnership. So we We identified ways to do timely reviews at state and local government levels. We've clarified on how fees should be determined. These are just a starting point for the discussion, but we really, our team and my colleagues, and certainly with Republican Bob Latta leading the effort on our telecommunications sub breakthrough. If we're serious, if we're not serious, then we're wasting money. And you know, the money will just go to overbuild existing coverage, and we will never connect every American. And that should be the opportunity we have in this country, one way or another, is to connect all Americans. Can you imagine if this was the 1930s and we had the same attitude about putting power lines in as we do about some of the regulations that slow us down getting high-speed broadband deployed? We'd never have electrification. We'd never would have had telephones. I've got one community in my district that just to put 4 power poles in on federal ground took them 3.5 years to go through the siting process under NEPA. And it's like they just wanted to get 3-phase power for the first time into this little rural town. 3.5 years, put 4 power poles in the ground. It was nonsense, but it's the way it works. And so our legislation really would streamline. It's aggressive, but we're open to the discussion. But we got to move forward.
You know, and you mentioned a minute ago, you know, at the top, you mentioned mapping, and I saw that you had also recently signed a bipartisan letter highlighting the need to fund the Broadband Data Act and how critical mapping was. And I sort of describe the importance of that. I think that's a critical piece that folks need to understand.
Yeah, Tom, we passed the legislation calling for the mapping. Now you have to fund it. And that needs to happen, or needs to happen soon. I know that the FCC is implementing it the best they can. They're moving forward. We all share a common vision here. There's no difference. But at some point, you have to put money to it to make it work. And so we was happy to sign a letter urging that we get the money to where it needs to go to get the mapping done, because we're behind and we need to get it done. We also need to, we passed some legislation on rip and replace to remove certain equipment that poses potential vulnerabilities to our telecommunications networks. And so we need to put money behind that as well. I've talked directly to the president, vice president, and others, the administration, and my colleagues about that, the rip and replace. We have to be serious about protecting the safety and security and the reliability and resiliency and capacity of our telecommunications networks. And I'd make the same argument, by the way, about our electric grid. We have known vulnerabilities, and just as we had some heads up about what a pandemic could mean, nobody ever thought it could ever happen like this. And we really have learned what the shortcomings were despite our best planning. Well, we've been warned about problems that could exist in the telecommunications networks and the electric grid. We need to get really serious about fixing them. And if we want America to lead on 5G development and the next wave of technology, as we've always led, then we have to get ahead on this too. So I just think making spectrum the ability to do the build out is just, these are essential components of a strong America.
Well, so you mentioned, you know, you've got your rural broadband or infrastructure bills that you've talked about. I know there are others. This is really emerging in the coming days and, you know, the last week and likely coming months as a major national discussion around rural connectivity, and it will be discussed, I'm sure, in both chambers and by the administration and others. I'm wondering, what's the likelihood that we're going to see really two things? Number one, funding for additional rural connectivity on the ground in your parts of your district in Oregon and other rural communities anytime soon, and I guess importantly for that, what is the likelihood that we see a package passed in this kind of environment today on Capitol Hill?
Well, I'm hopeful, but you know how the legislative process is. I'll believe it when I see it, right? And so it's a long, tortuous process. It was made that way by the folks that gave us the government structure we have. But I think there is strong bipartisan, bicameral support to improve access to high-speed communications networks. Now the FCC is in the middle of distributing the Connect America Phase 2 funds, and just this year, I know Oregon's already received allocation of 2 million over 10, actually about almost 3 million. That'll serve nearly 4,000 locations. We've also received 2 million in the last few months to expand telehealth access, and it's, as you know, Tom, in fact, we've done a deal on telehealth to be in the White House recently, where the head of CMS said in January about 1% of charges were for telehealth under Medicare, and by the end of June it was 28%. And so you see, when seniors got access to doing their health care by the broadband and telehealth, they took advantage of it. And by the way, we know how deadly COVID is. The older you get, the deadlier the virus is. And so, of course, it makes sense. If you don't have to go in and sit in a waiting room somewhere with other sick patients to get your stuff done, stay at home and do it on your iPad or your monitor, whatever. And so I think telehealth really drives this. Mapping is essential. Then we can target the resource where we need it. And then let's expedite the ability to actually build it and not take 2 or 3 or 5 years. Americans need this connectivity. We need it for telehealth. We need it for education. You think about how many parents have suddenly become kindergarten or 5th grade teachers all of a sudden, and short order cooks along the way. And you need this as schools look to reopen. Many of them are saying, oh, we're going to do half day this day and half day that day, and then you're on online after that. Well, who says we have online that has the capacity? So we got to bust through. Now, I would say this, because we've had light touch regulation of the internet since its infancy, we have, the commercial side's built very resilient networks that have been able to handle the excess capacity, or had excess capacity to handle the excess demand that we're now seeing. We're all doing things like this during the day. The networks were built to handle video streaming at high capacity in the evening. You think about Netflix or Hulu or whatever your service is, they're built for that maximum usage. So actually there was capacity during the day. So we're able to work. Europe, they had a different approach, and they've had to throttle some of their content. And so I think we keep light touch, we clear out barriers, we put money behind it. Let's get this done.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a great approach, and hopefully we'll see some action, congressional action, and get some dollars on the ground and get this, like you say, get this done. So finally, I wanted to just sort of cap this by asking, this is such a critical issue nationally and obviously in your district as well. How can we recommend folks sort of get plugged into this issue, who are passionate, who care about it, who want to see their community get wired and be part of this process, whether it's on a federal level or a state level? I'm curious how we can recommend your constituents get engaged.
It's really important. Turn out. If we have town halls again, turn out, speak up. In the meantime, I think that, in some ways, good old-fashioned handwritten letter. I operation on individual letters, not the sort of postcard everybody sends in or the click and send emails. We cataloged all that. I respond to all that. But you really feel the passion when somebody puts it in their own words and communicates, whether that's by email or any other mechanism on Facebook or whatever. But speak up. Don't remain silent. Be involved. Be engaged. Contact your local member of Congress. Tell them this matters and why. And I think most of us are open to doing something about it. This should not be a hard sell. It really shouldn't. I think parents want it for their kids and education. Businesses want it, and think how many entrepreneurs are working out of their homes right now. You just go from one end of the spectrum to the other. I don't know anybody's against high-speed broadband. Right. I don't know anybody that's against building out 5G. Well, there are a few people, but you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
And so the science is there, the need is there to go get this done.
Well, fantastic, and that's a great way to end the conversation. I really appreciate you giving us this time. I wanted to please ask that you give my best to your family and your staff, and
Thank
stay
you.
safe and be well. And thank you again for sitting down with us for a few minutes.
It's good to see you again, and maybe we can actually do this in person someday one more time. So, but yeah,
Absolutely, would
stay
love to.
safe and best to you and yours as well.
Thank you.